Before the infamous Port Arthur Massacre, an often forgotten massacre took place in the quiet suburb of Strathfield, Sydney on August 17, 1991. In just minutes, Wade Frankum killed 7 people and injured 6 others before taking his own life. The Strathfield Massacre stunned Australia and became a pivotal moment that helped spark national conversations about gun control, mental health and public safety. Uncover the dark history of this unique country with our next chapter, the Strathfield Massacre. This is Australian Crime Stories. Wade Frankum grew up in a conservative and emotionally repressive household. He experienced a strict upbringing that was low on affection and approval. There is little evidence in public records about his childhood beyond this emotional tone. He attended Newington College, a private boys' school in Sydney, and later transferred to Homebush Boys High School, a public high school. He was described as socially awkward, and by his early 20s, began to withdraw into a more reclusive lifestyle. There are no known reports of physical abuse or severe trauma from his youth, but his emotional development appeared stunted. Wade drifted through a series of dead-end jobs during his 20s and early 30s. He never held a long-term career or found stability. In the final year of his life, he worked irregular hours as a taxi driver in Sydney. At the time of the massacre, he lived with his younger sister Gaynor Frankum and her boyfriend Darren Chalk in their deceased parents' North Strathfield home. According to neighbours, Wade was a quiet loner, polite but unremarkable. Frankum's father died from emphysema approximately 5 years before the massacre. In April 1990, Frankum's mother committed suicide by gassing herself in her car in the family garage. Wade discovered her body. This was a devastating and formative trauma. Psychiatrists and the coroner concluded this was a significant turning point in his life. Frankum spent the bulk of a $30,000 inheritance from his mother on prostitutes, whom he visited 2 to 3 times a week. This habit became compulsive and central to his emotional life. Sex workers later reported that he relied on them emotionally, not just sexually. One woman told police,
"Sexual release was the major thing in his life. If that was going to cease, that could have been catastrophic for him."
By mid-1991, Frankum was running out of money, unable to continue seeing prostitutes, possibly increasing his desperation and rage. He also possessed a large collection of violent pornography, sadomasochistic materials, and snuff-style media. He had magazines featuring torture and murder fantasies, violent movies and books like a well-thumbed copy of American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This literature, according to the inquest, normalized and glorified violence, reinforcing his fantasies and shaping his inner world. In December 1990, approximately 31 years old, Wade sought help for depression and began seeing a psychologist. He ceased treatment in February 1991, 6 months before the massacre. No serious diagnosis was made, and there was no documented history of psychosis or psychiatric hospitalization. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Rod Milton, who later profiled him after the massacre, stated Frankum was
a lonely, guilty, repressed, but fairly normal individual. There was no history of severe aggression or psychiatric disorder.
Milton believed Frankum's personality was vulnerable and rigid, with low coping capacity under stress. He lacked resilience and emotional flexibility, making him susceptible to collapse when faced with grief, conflict, or personal failure. Frankum legally obtained a shooter's license in September 1990 without raising any red flags. In January of 1991, he purchased a 7.62mm SKS semi-automatic assault rifle, 100 rounds of ammunition and 3 magazines. Later, in April 1991, he bought a 20-inch Bowie knife and a pair of metal handcuffs. He had the knife professionally sharpened to a razor's edge at a Mr. Minute store. His housemate later said Frankum claimed the weapons were for protection and that
it's a fed-up world out there, and there's some weird furs out there.
In July 1991, just a month before the attack, he was seen sharpening the knife behind a locked door, alone, shortly after shaving his head. These were clear preparatory behaviours, according to Coroner Waller.
It is clear that by this time he had killing on his mind.
On Saturday, August 17th, 1991, Strathfield Plaza in Sydney's inner west was filled with the usual weekend bustle. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and families, couples and teenagers were enjoying the shops, cafes and supermarkets. At around 2 p.m, Wade John Frankum entered the Coffee Pot Cafe, one of the plaza's most popular spots. He was wearing jeans, a denim jacket and a grey beanie. With him, he carried a post-pack mailing tube that concealed a 7.62mm SKS semi-automatic assault rifle. In his clothing, he also had a 20-inch Bowie knife and several fully loaded magazines of ammunition. Frankum took a booth seat and quietly drank 4 cups of coffee over the course of about an hour. Sitting nearby were 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong, a Macdonald College student, and her friend. Frankum stared at them repeatedly in a way that made them uncomfortable, but they dismissed his odd behaviour as harmless. At precisely 3:35 p.m, without any provocation or indication, Frankum suddenly stood up on the bench of his booth, placed one knee on the seat, smiled, and plunged the massive Bowie knife 4 times into Roberta's back. She managed a single scream before collapsing onto the table, dead. Her horrified friend fled toward the cafe counter, screaming for help. Frankum left the knife embedded in Roberta's back and immediately pulled the assault rifle from the post-pack tube. According to eyewitness and later hero Gregory Reed,
he drove the Bowie knife straight between her shoulder blades downward, then pulled the rifle out of the pack and started shooting.
The cafe erupted into chaos. Frankum fired a shot into the ceiling, prompting customers to scream, run, or freeze in terror. He then began executing people around him. Joyce Nixon, aged 61, and her daughter Patricia Rowe, 36, were both gunned down as they tried to protect Rowe's 2 sons, 15-year-old Kevin and 9-year-old Nathan, who miraculously survived. The cafe's owner, 51-year-old George Mavris, hearing the commotion from the kitchen, emerged to investigate and was shot dead on the spot. His brother James, working behind the coffee machine, later said,
"By the time I got up again, my brother was dead."
Nearby sat Carol Dickinson, 47, her daughter Belinda, 20, and friend Rochelle Milburn, 17. As Rochelle tried to move toward Frankum, she was shot in the head. Carol, in a selfless final act, pushed Belinda behind a large pot plant, shielding her from view. As she screamed for her daughter's life, Carol was shot in the chest and killed. After the initial bloodbath, Frankum stormed out of the Coffee Pot Cafe and began walking through the open plaza area, firing at random. He shot Helen Shue in the arm, and another woman was struck in the leg. Then he entered a nearby chemist and shot 53-year-old Robertson Can Hock Voon dead. Shoppers dove behind counters and into storerooms.
Little kids were hiding at the back of my shop saying their prayers.
Recalled one witness.
They were saying, "Please God, help us."
The plaza echoed with gunfire, screams, and the sound of shoppers stampeding toward exits or diving for cover. Frankum continued his rampage toward the escalators leading to the rooftop car park. Along the way, he fired several shots into the ceiling and through the windows of various shop fronts. On the way to the roof, he came across a young couple, Beulah Patrick and Brett Lenane. Both were shot, but survived by crawling into a pool of their own blood and remaining motionless. Shortly afterward, Frankum shot George Sadawi, a cleaner, multiple times in the leg, hand, stomach and arm. Sadawi also survived. Amid the chaos, 41-year-old Vietnam veteran Gregory Red, who had been in a hardware store near the coffee pot at the start of the massacre, took decisive action. Red had weighed 140 kilograms at the time, but sprinted up the plaza's stairwell, taking 3 steps at a time to the rooftop level to warn people.
"Quick, there's a killer behind me.
He told shocked onlookers.
Lay down on the ground and he won't shoot you."
He managed to get about 10 people to safety by instructing them to lie still and stay low. But Frankum saw him.
"I was out in the open and I was telling this lady, lay down in your car."
It's too late. He's right behind you.
Frankum stood about 20 feet away and aimed directly at him.
I looked up and saw the barrel. I thought, I'm gone. I dived to the side of my car and he fired when I was jumping through the air.
Reed was hit in both feet but survived. His courage would later be recognised with the Star of Courage, one of Australia's highest civilian honours. Now, on the rooftop and out of victims nearby, Frankum attempted to enter the adjacent Social Security office to gain the high ground and perhaps extend his shooting spree. He tried to shoot through the aluminium locks on the doors, but failed. Frustrated, he leaned over the rooftop wall and opened fire toward Strathfield railway station and the taxi rank below. Several bullets struck structures and vehicles, and Wu and Wu were injured in the volley. They managed to escape by hiding in the station tunnel. Then, in a final, brief and chilling interaction, Frankum approached a car driven by Catherine Noyes, who had just driven into the rooftop car park, unaware of the massacre. He pointed his rifle through her passenger window and screamed,
"Drive me to Enfield."
She complied and started driving down one level, but then the wail of approaching sirens echoed through the concrete of the car park. Frankum's tone changed. He said softly,
"I'm really sorry. Stop."
He got out of the car. As Noyes drove away, she looked in her rearview mirror and saw Frankum kneel on the concrete. He placed the barrel of his rifle under his chin and fired a single shot. It was 3:50 p.m. The massacre had lasted less than 10 minutes. In total, Frankum had murdered 7 people, wounded 6 more, and fired approximately 50 rounds. His suicide brought the death toll to 8. Blood, bullet casings, broken glass, and abandoned shopping bags marked his trail of destruction. When the first emergency calls came through on the afternoon of Saturday, August 17, 1991, reporting gunfire at Strathfield Plaza, New South Wales Police had no idea of the scale of the incident unfolding. The first responders believed they were heading to a possible robbery or violent altercation. What they encountered instead was something far worse: a mass casualty incident. Retired New South Wales Police Commissioner Ken Moroney, who at the time was serving as acting Southwest Region Commander, rushed to the scene. He was met at the entrance of the plaza by Detective Chief Inspector Adrian Allingham, who gave him a stark assessment.
There had been a number of murders, and the offender appears to have taken his own life on the roof of the shopping centre.
But nothing could have prepared Moroney for what he would see next. Upon entering the plaza, police were confronted with a trail of carnage. Dead bodies were still lying where they had fallen, in the Coffee Pot Cafe, in front of shops, near the escalators, and on the rooftop car park. Officers quickly secured and sealed off all access points to Strathfield Plaza. Armed police units combed the building, verifying that the gunman, identified soon after as Wade Frankum, had in fact taken his own life and posed no further threat. Forensic teams began the daunting task of documenting the scene, collecting 50 spent bullet casings, securing the murder weapons, and identifying victims. Outside, families of the victims gathered behind police lines, begging officers for information. Commissioner Moroney recalled,
"I remember the family pleading to let them in so they could find their father or brother, and the difficult task police had of preserving the crime scene and trying to provide reassurance to family members at the same time.
Officers were tasked not only with securing the plaza, but also comforting distraught relatives and keeping order in the face of unthinkable grief. Though many of the officers attending the scene had dealt with violent deaths before, none had encountered a massacre of this scale. Moroni later reflected,
"I had seen murdered bodies, but I had never seen that many in one place at one time. The enormity of what had occurred started to ring home to me."
He described the moment of walking into the cafe and seeing the bodies of a mother, daughter and niece still lying behind the booth where Frankum had sat for over an hour. Some officers involved in the first response reportedly sought counselling afterward, and the massacre became a benchmark in New South Wales police history for trauma and critical incident management. Internally, the massacre led to significant procedural reflection within New South Wales Police. At the time, the New South Wales Police were not regularly trained for active shooter situations, and armed units were deployed on a reactive basis. After Strathfield, the force reviewed and revised critical incident response protocols, public building security coordination, and mental health referral systems for licensed firearm owners. The massacre also exposed major flaws in the licensing and monitoring of gun owners, prompting New South Wales Police to support upcoming firearm reforms. Following the massacre, and after lobbying from groups like the National Coalition for Gun Control, the New South Wales government passed a series of reforms with input from police leadership. Key outcomes included a ban on private sales of military-style self-loading rifles, creation of a joint select committee on gun laws, the introduction of a gun amnesty program, and the establishment of the computerised operational policing system in 1994, which allowed New South Wales Police to track every licensed gun owner in the state and flag individuals with criminal or mental health histories. These reforms were supported by New South Wales Police, who recognised the danger posed by unmonitored access to semi-automatic weapons like the one Frankum had legally purchased in 1991. Though often overshadowed by the Port Arthur Massacre in 1996, Strathfield laid the groundwork for Australia's globally respected gun laws.
I feel the people who died at the Strathfield Massacre, they didn't die in vain. That tragedy contributed to something.
Before the Strathfield Massacre in 1991, Australia had already experienced several deadly mass shootings, including the Hoddle Street Massacre in 1987, where Julian Knight killed 7 people in Melbourne, and the Queen Street Massacre later that same year, in which Frank Vitkovich killed 8. These attacks, carried out with legally or illegally acquired firearms, highlighted significant gaps in Australia's gun regulation. Since these reforms, Australia has seen a dramatic decline in mass shootings involving firearms, with only a handful of isolated incidents occurring in the decades that followed. This sustained reduction is widely attributed to the country's comprehensive gun laws and its proactive stance on firearm regulation, first sparked by tragedies like Strathfield. Roberta Bobby Armstrong, 15 years old. Joyce Nixon, 61 years old. Patricia Rowe, 36 years old. George Mavris, 51 years old. Rochelle Milburn, 17 years old. Carol Dickinson, 47 years old. Robertson Can Hock Voon, 53 years old. The Strathfield Massacre was a shocking act of violence that claimed 7 innocent lives and deeply scarred the Australian public. Though the events of that day remain haunting, they also served as a catalyst for change, ensuring that the victims' deaths were not in vain. This has been Australian Crime Stories, the Strathfield Massacre. Follow us for a new episode every Monday.